Boom, and we're live. Hi, good morning, everybody. This is an early morning post, um, owing to ideas that have been running through my mind from based on posts and things that I've read over the last couple of days. I'm going to publish this to Instagram. I'm going to put it on Rumble and YouTube, and it would really be helpful if you could hit like, share, subscribe, because it helps this content to come up to more people. And if you agree with some of the things that I say, then it would be like amplifying your own voice to like my posts. So thank you very much for that. So what am I going to talk about this morning? Um, it seems to me that many of us are busy trying to fit into society, one way or the other, and almost at any price. And I'm here to tell you that actually, no, your job first and foremost, my job first and foremost, is to live my life as a human being, not to fit in to some cookie cutter role that somebody who knows nothing about humanity is suggesting I should be following. So that's the thesis. Now, why do I say this? You know, when you've been lied to for a long time, being told the truth is like a slap in the face. It was Mark Twain who said that it is easier to fool another than to convince them that they have been deceived in the past. And thus it always was. So when somebody is telling you the truth after a long period of you being kind of gaslighted or somehow duped, it's very, very difficult and feels like an assault on yourself. Why? Because your whole world, your sense of reality has been constructed on the basis of usually a well curated and oft repeated lie, which seems to you quite feasible. Let's take a look at where Europe stands in this. And by the way, a lot of what I do, a lot of what I say lives at the interface of Europe with Africa. And whereas Europeans never see themselves in the context of Africa, Africans always see themselves in the context of Europe because they understand that without their resources, Europeans couldn't live the lives they lead. And Africans pay the price of that relationship. Europeans enjoy the consequences of that relationship and proceed to live completely and utterly in denial of it most of the time. But it is a reality. Europe, Africa, the North capital N and the South capital S are like the two sides of this hand. There's the back and there's the front. And you can't have one without the other. So the lessons that are being taught or learned by one group should be carefully observed by the other group, because both of you live in the same ecosystem. Now, usually people in the West are taught that they are proto-normal as far as genus Homo sapiens is concerned. They are raised to feel as if they are the cookie cutter, they are the archetype of what humanity, quote unquote, should be when it's evolved to its highest level. If people in Europe don't feel like that, it's because they have typically had an extraordinary spiritual awakening of some kind, or they just didn't pay attention in school, because everything in the educational curriculum is in between the lines, teaching the supremacism of the West. So, of course, at the same time, whereas people in Europe are taught that they are the de facto rulers of the world, they have the freedom and the agency to run their lives the way they want. Most European countries, especially Western European countries, are democracies. And under the system of democracy, you have kind of a multiple party system in the main. And if the party you voted for this time doesn't live up to the billing, you kick them out at the next round of elections. So it looks as if you're in charge. But then something comes along like this global pandemic we have just endured, and which, by the way, I'm pretty certain is not actually over yet. And what is shocking, the thing that shocked me the most, because I've never seen it in my lifetime, was to see certainly British people where I live completely down at heel and being pulled along by the nose and instructed what to do and what not to do. And the decisions were being made not by anybody the British people had elected, but by officials who, by dint of their position in the national, international, and world system, had suddenly grabbed the power to decide what our future economic, medical, and social destiny should become. Now, it is under these circumstances, and when you started to see places like Canada, which are basically Western European based countries, and Australia, also peopled by colonials from mostly Western European origin, it is when you started to see the people in these countries being treated like serfs and slaves that the wheels started to come off the narrative, that this idea of a kind of Western supremacism based on their self-willed liberty was a matter that was given. And this was the model that was going to be taken around the world to educate other people about how to live. And you watched people in Canada and Australia be treated pretty much towards the end like the natives who they colonized and effectively wiped out in both territories. So this is where the lie of Western supremacism becomes apparent. Actually, if you add it up with other key facts in the history of the West, I mean, I'm a bit of a history buff. I loved history at school. I did kind of English and European medieval history at A level. It's kind of an exotic subject, but boy, did it give you a flavor of how Europe actually came into being. If you look, for example, in the last century at the First World War and the Second World War, First World War, maybe 20 million people, military and civilian, lost their lives. The Second World War, you add the excessive over with Mr. Stalin in Russia, and maybe 80 million people lost their lives. You start to think that, oh my God, this so-called freedom for the exalted races of the world is not much of a freedom at all, because owing to the great power and the very well curated histories of the countries involved, everybody could be relied upon to, to be patriotic to the great nation, which they'd been learning since they were knee high to a grasshopper, was their country, and something that they felt really, really bravely and proudly about, and something that they were prepared to die for. Meanwhile, the elites that sent them to war sat at home, tut-tutted, went round, encouraged the troops, while the troops, ordinary people, died in their millions. Is that freedom? Is that the way the exalted, the superior people live? I don't think so. I think the whole thing is actually a lie. I don't think anybody is superior in Western Europe at all. There are periods of time when they are slaughtered like cockroaches. When I add up the numbers, to be honest with you, it is so shocking and so appalling that I ask myself, why would anybody want to fit in with and repeat such a system? Because it offends against the one golden rule of life, the dignity of human life. But of course, if you're being raised in a system of values which basically says some lives are worth more than others, which is the value that is exported outside of Europe, that European lives are worth more than other lives, then maybe you start to understand that for some people, treating Europeans like cockroaches, running untested medications through them and I always get a little bit activated when I hear this done to children, because it is the one thing that defines your adulthood is your preparedness to protect a child. And if you are prepared to expose a child to that kind of danger, well, for me, it goes absolutely and utterly beyond the pale and is certainly not the symbol of a civilization which is advanced, which is superior, which is better than that of others. Unless, of course, you feel those lives aren't worth saving. So that's part one of this post. And I'm setting it up like this so that people get a chance to think it through. Because in part two, I'm going to say to you that your job is not to fit into this cookie cutter faux reality that people's egos have been fluffed up to adopt about themselves. Your job is to discover your humanity. And it is when you discover your humanity that you understand that when a system is unfaithful to you, if a partner is unfaithful to you, you part ways with that system, you part ways with that partner. You are under no obligation to walk into your own self-abuse, to deliver your head, to be chopped off by a system which seems rampantly unaware of the value and the dignity of your life. Thanks for joining me. In part two, I'm going to talk about why your job is not to fit in to this cookie cutter that is like a meat grinder for the lives of ordinary people. Thanks for joining me.